Good morning. Happy Sabbath. It's a beautiful day out there today.
Amen.
The humidity is gone and the wind. Um, anyway, I'm glad that we're able to be here. And I don't know, it just seems like a place of sanctuary today, an appropriate name. A sanctuary and an escape from the world is very much appreciated. Um, today, I want to speak to you about Jesus speaking to the disciples on the Mount of Olives, and some of what he had to say that would pertain to us and also pertain to them. But I want to set the stage for this first. We're going to be mainly studying out of Matthew chapter 24 and a little bit out of Mark chapter 21, but mainly Matthew 24. But before we go to Matthew 24, if you would like to look there in Matthew 21, I just wanted to set the stage for what was going on. And in Matthew chapter 21, down to verse 10, this is when Jesus is getting ready to come to Jerusalem. And he's getting ready to ride into Jerusalem, and this is where we have, I think we get Palm Sunday, where he rides the donkey into the city. Much anticipated event among people who had been following Jesus. And then that would be a Sunday. And then on Monday, in verse 12, it says then that Jesus went into the temple. So he had now ridden into town, he was going to the temple, and he drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables and the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. This was a money-making scheme for the scribes and the Pharisees. They got a cut of this there at the temple. So that was on a Monday morning. And then on verse 17, you'll see there, and then he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there. So he spent the night there, and then the next day, Tuesday morning, in verse 18, it says, now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry, and you have the story there. But down here in verse 23, let me call your attention to that. Now, and Jesus returns back to the temple. Now, when he came into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people confronted him as he was teaching. And they said, well, by what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority? Now, keep in mind, Jesus was going to be crucified on Friday. So this is the week leading up. And these were some of the events, the things that were going on leading up to Friday. So we get over here prior to Matthew chapter 24, and if I don't know if your Bible has a heading or not, but mine does. It says at the start of Matthew chapter 22 says, "Woe to the scribes and the Pharisees." Now, this was a bitter denunciation of the scribes and the Pharisees. This was one of the harshest words that would come out of the lips of Jesus to any group of people. And he never talked like that to the common man and to sinners. But he had pretty harsh words for these people there at the temple. So with that in mind, I would like to start this message with Matthew 23, verse 38. Well, let me go ahead with verse 37. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chick under the wing, but you were not willing." And this is the verse here. "See, your house is left desolate." see, your house is left to you desolate. Okay. Um, Jesus was leaving the temple. And when he left the temple basically was going to be desolate. I mean, he's done with the temple. And Jesus is going to leave, and he's going to leave for the last time. He'll never set foot in the temple again. Now, Jesus' words to the priests and the rulers, the scribes, a lot of them, what I'm going to share with you, comes from the book Desire of Ages. And according to that information, the scribes and the Pharisees, it got them in the heart, and they cringed about that when Jesus said, your house is left desolate, because they had been following Jesus, and they knew that people believed him to be the Messiah, and he had heard what they had heard what Jesus had said about himself. And this kind of struck terror into their hearts. Apparently, they showed some indifference, and they didn't seem on the outward to be fazed by this, but inwardly, they felt threatened. They felt an unseen danger. And they questioned, could it be that this magnificent temple was going to be laid into a heap of ruins? And if so, how could that be? So now Jesus had expressed his feelings against the scribes and the Pharisees in chapter 23, and he said that, behold, your house is left to you desolate, and he's leaving the temple, and the disciples were walking with Jesus out of the temple, and they called his attention to the beauty and the strength of the temple. And these stones were the purest marble, nothing but the finest, and they were poured in such a way that you couldn't even hardly see a seam in them. And it was, from a very short distance, the whole building looked like it was one big solid stone. It was magnificent, white, just perfect whiteness. And it was a fabulous size. So the question is, how would these mighty walls be overthrown? And Christ's attention was attracted to the magnificent temple, and the view before him was indeed beautiful. But with sadness he said, listen to my words. There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, Christ had spoken this with a large number of people around. But when he was alone, as he was leaving the temple and as he was alone, Peter, John, James, and Andrew, they came to him as he sat on the Mount of Olives, outside the gates, I believe. They said, tell us, they said, when shall these things be? First question. What shall be the sign of thy coming? Another question. And the end of the world. I phrased it all together there. And Jesus didn't answer them separately either on all these questions. The destruction of Jerusalem and the great day that is coming were mingled together. And he did this in mercy to them. He blended the description of these two great crises. And he left it for them to study out for themselves. And in a little bit, you'll see some of the reason he did this. Now, turning to the disciple in verse 4, Matthew 4 said, take heed that no man deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. Many false messiahs did appear, and did claim and to do miracles, and declaring at that time that the Jewish nation has come. Now, Christ's words were fulfilled between his death and the siege of Jerusalem, and many false prophets did appear. They appeared to them in Jerusalem. And he warned them about it. But this warning was also given to us in our age. We're to be conscious of that. And in verse 6 he says, and you shall hear wars, rumors of wars. See See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, men wrestled for supremacy, emperors were murdered, those supposed to be standing next to the throne were slain, and there were wars and rumors of war. So it was quite a mess in Jerusalem at that time. And Jesus said, all these things must come to pass, but the end of the Jewish nation as a nation is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilence, earthquakes in various places. Verse 8. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. And then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted. They shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And all this the Christians did suffer. Fathers and mothers betrayed their children. Children betrayed their parents. Friends delivered friends up to the Sanhedrin. The persecutors wrought out their purpose by killing Stephen, James, and other Christians. Through his servants, God gave the Jewish people a last opportunity to repent. And Jesus manifested himself through his witnesses in their arrest, and in their trial, and in their imprisonment. Yet the judges pronounced on them the death sentence. They were men of whom the world was not worthy. And by killing them, they were killing Christ all over again. They wouldn't accept Jesus. After his death, they crucified and killed people that were witnesses for Jesus, showing that their hearts were definitely not unchanged about how they felt about Jesus. The authorities this is going to happen again. So authorities are going to make laws that are going to restrict religious liberty. They will assume the right that is God's alone, thinking that they can force the conscience. The conscience that God alone should control. And this work is now underway. This work will continue to be carried forward until they reach a boundary over which they cannot step. God will interpose in behalf of his loyal commandment-keeping people. And on every occasion when persecution has taken place, those who witness it make a decision either for Christ or against him. That's going on in China. It's been going on in the Middle East. People that witness these persecutions and know about it are making a decision. Christ gave his disciples a sign of the ruin to come onto Jerusalem, and he told them how to escape. And in Luke chapter 21 and verse 20, it's the same story. He's telling them, the disciples, when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near. And we're talking about the destruction of the temple. And he's telling them, and they're going to share this with people in Jerusalem. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let them not that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these will be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. So, you have Jerusalem that's surrounded. I meant to look it up, and I didn't. I believe it was by Roman soldiers. They were surrounded, kind of siege on Jerusalem. This warning that Jesus gave was 40 years after what he was saying was going to happen 40 years after his death. the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, the Christians that obeyed the warning, and many of them did, and the ones that paid attention to this, not a single one of them died. And it got so bad. Well, I think what happened was the armies, they had pulled back, and I believe it was in October, and they had a chance to flee. And it was just, they'd kind of been fighting back and forth down in the valley around the outside of Jerusalem, and the Jews and the Romans, and nobody getting anywhere. And the Romans pulled back for just a short while, and at that time, those that had heard this prophecy recognized what was going on, and they left immediately. They left and went into the mountains, and every one of them was spared because it wasn't just a really short time. I mean, like, just a short window of opportunity. The Roman armies were back, and they laid siege, and there was terrible starvation, and it was just a mess, and millions perished. It says, pray that this goes on now with this prophecy. Jesus says, keep in mind this is talking about what will happen 40 years after he died. Pray that your flight not be in the winter nor on the Sabbath day. That's in Matthew 24:20. So here we have Jesus, who made the Sabbath and did not abolish it, nailing it to the cross. The Sabbath was not rendered null and void by his death. 40 years after his crucifixion, it was still to be held sacred. Interesting point. Now, for 40 years, those in Jerusalem were to pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day. Now, 40 years is a long time to pray for anything, isn't it? Seems like it would be a pretty serious thing. They would also pray that their flight wouldn't be on the winter. Winter would definitely have made it hard to travel. It would have been difficult to travel on a Sabbath day, too. I was up shop, it was very difficult to do both. Well, they were able to escape, and my understanding of history was sometime around October. So it wasn't in the winter, and it wasn't on the Sabbath. But these people prayed for 40 years. From the destruction of Jerusalem, Christ passed on rapidly to the greater event, the coming of the Son of Man. Now, between these two events lay open to Christ's view long centuries of darkness, centuries for his church, marked with blood and tears and agony. Upon these scenes, and this is where the mercy comes into the disciples, upon these scenes his disciples could not then endure to look. And Jesus passed by them with a brief mention. Then there shall be great tribulation, he said. This is in verse 21, Matthew 24, verse 21. Such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor not even shall be, and except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, these days shall be shortened. For more than 1,000 years, such persecution as the world had never seen came upon Christ's followers through the dark ages. We studied a little about this morning in Sabbath school class. Persecution of Christ's followers by the church. Millions upon millions of his faithful witnesses will be slain through this period of time. Had God not stretched out his hand to preserve his people, all would have perished. You know, that is from the Spirit of Prophecy in the book Desire of Ages. Now, this would have been the second time in Earth's history, I thought, that all of God's people could have been destroyed. Because in the days of Noah, had God not brought the flood, Noah and his righteous children would have eventually lived and perished, because everybody had made up their mind at that point in time. Eventually, there would have been no righteous left alive and no lineage for Christ to come through. So God, in his mercy, destroyed the wicked world and preserved a line for Christ to come to. Otherwise, the whole world would have eventually gone to complete wickedness. There wouldn't have been any righteous, and all this creation would have been in nobody for God. And according to the spirit of prophecy, it says that all would have perished. I don't know, just a thought. I just put that out there. This is my thoughts on that, and according to what was said here in the Desire of Ages. But in verse 22 it says, "But for the elect's sake," he said, "those days shall be shortened." Well, Jesus kind of said it there. Now, in unmistakable language, the Lord speaks of his second coming, and he's giving warnings of danger that would precede his return. And this is in verse 23. "If any man say to you, Lo, he is here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs, false prophets, and show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." That's God's people. "Behold, I have told you before." So he's telling us in advance. False prophets, and false Christ. "Wherefore, if they shall say to you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chamber, do not believe it." Verse 27. "For as lightning comes out of the east and shines into the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. As one of the signs of Jerusalem's destruction, Christ had said many false prophets would arise, and they would deceive many. False prophets did arise, and they did deceive the people, and led many of them in great numbers out into the desert at the wrong time. Now, even now, false Christ and false prophets are showing signs and wonders to deceive his people. Christ said, "Don't believe it. For as lightning comes out of the east and shines to the west, so also shall be the coming of the Son of Man." Now the Savior gives us signs of his coming, and more than this, he fixes the time of these first signs when they shall appear. And this is it. It's in verse 29. He fixes the times for us. Immediately after the tribulation, that's the dark ages, of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31. "And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." All right? At the close of the great papal persecution, Christ declared, the sun should be darkened, the moon should not give her light, and the stars should fall from heaven. Those events have happened. I had to go back and get my book here, Bible Readings for the Home. This is a good little book. If you don't have one, I would encourage you to get one. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail. I'm just going to tell you when it happened. You can look it up for yourself. It says, "A wonderful darkening of the sun and the moon. The remarkable dark day of May 19th, 1780, is described by Samuel Williams of Harvard." And it goes on in the description of that particular day, what happened. Another one, "The fallen stars. Remarkable display of fallen stars. The morning of November 13th, 1833, says an eyewitness, Yale astronomer was rendered memorable by the exhibition of a phenomenon called shooting stars." And it goes on to explain the sky was just completely ablaze with them. Now, Jesus said these events would happen right at the end of the Great Tribulation. And the think it was 1793, whatever we were talking, Tom was talking this morning about the end, when the little horn lost its power temporarily. That was the end of the Great Tribulation, basically, at that point. And these events now have happened, and Jesus says, then the end will come. So you can see we're really close here. And the Lord says, learn a parable of the fig tree. This is in verse 32. When its branch is yet tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So likewise, when you see it, you shall see all these things. Know that he is near, even at the doors. Now, he's not near like out there in the yard or out in the street. He's near right at the door. Really close. Christ continues in verse 37, pointing out the conditions of the world at his coming. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, Christ does not here bring into view an earthly millennium, a span of 1,000 years, where people get to prepare for eternity. Jesus doesn't say that, does he? He doesn't talk about a second chance. He doesn't talk about an earth where those that didn't accept Jesus will now have an opportunity. He doesn't say that. It says that Noah entered the ark and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And another little thing, and I didn't have it in my notes, but I'll just tell you, you know, before the flood, the angel came down, took his course down, shut the door to the ark. I believe it was 7 days before the rain started. Nobody could get on the ark at that point in time. Probation had closed prior to the first drops of rain. Now, at some point in time, probation is going to close for the inhabitants of the earth. We won't know when it's going to be. But when Jesus comes, it's too late then, because probation will close. When Jesus leaves his ministry in the heavenly sanctuary, where judgment is taking place, when he takes off his priestly garb, he's done with it. Puts on the garb of war and returns to get his people. Judgment is already over. Of course, we know that when the 7 last plagues start to fall, God's people are sealed and the judgment is done at that time. So that'll be a clue when the first of the 7 last plagues fall. He tells us that it was in the days of Noah, so it will be when the Son of Man comes again. Well, how was it in Noah's day? God, this is in Genesis 6:5. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that the imagination of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. Just constant evil. I think we can kind of see some of that today, can't we? I mean, I think this past week I quit watching the news. I just got tired of it. Just sick of it. The inhabitants of the antediluvian world, those are the pre-flood people, turned from God. They refused to do his holy will. They followed their own unholy imagination and perverted ideas. Today the world is following the same course. The transgression of God's laws are filling the earth with wickedness. Their lustful practices, untamed passions are fast filling the world with violence. Nobody would dispute that, you think? In the prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction, Christ said, because the iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Kind of sounds like it catches on. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. That's in verse 14. Should have told you where it was. Before the return of Jesus, the everlasting gospel is to be preached to every nation, kindred, and tongue of people. That's in Revelation 14:6. Now, the Bible doesn't say that the world's going to be converted. It just says it's going to be preached. Not everybody's going to accept it. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to the world for a witness. And then the end's going to come. It'll be a witness. So, no excuse. The word will be out. You have any excuse other than that's just you didn't want to do it. That'll be the witness there. After he had given the signs of his coming, Christ said, when you see these things come pass, know that the kingdom of God is near at hand. And this is what he says. Take you heed, watch, and pray. This is from Luke 21, verse 31. Take you heed, watch, and pray. Those are key words. Watch and pray. Remember in Jerusalem, they were to pray, not for the Sabbath, not to travel on the Sabbath, or not for the winter. And they were to watch. And beware. And when you saw that opportunity, act on it. And Jesus says in Luke 12, verse 37, blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he comes, shall find what? Watching. Watching. Those who watch for the Lord's coming are not waiting in idle expectancy. Those that are watching for the Lord are purifying their souls by obedience to the truth. We're following what the Bible teaches us. We accept the truth and we apply it to our lives. With vigilant watching, they combine earnest working. Their zeal is quickened to cooperate with divine intelligence in working for the salvation of souls. They are declaring the truth that is now specifically applicable for our time. That's what God's people are doing. As in Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Moses, they declared the truth for their time. God's people at the end time will be doing the same thing. I think we are. When we have an opportunity, I think we try to do that. So will God's servants now give the special warning in their generation. Now, I might be a little guilty on that. Sometimes I'm just not quite how to approach people and tell them, even though they think they're in safety in maybe the church that they're going to, they're not. So I have a little bit of a difficulty with myself trying to find the right words. But as I prepared this and I'm giving it, I can see, you can see it out too. Our time is really getting short. Christ brings to view another class. And this is in Matthew 24:48. It says that we're just about done. If that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he is not looking for him. Now, in verse 48, it says, my Lord delayeth his coming. Now, this is what the evil servant says. Now, who are these evil servants? These evil servants are Christians. It says, my Lord delayeth. These are Christians. He does not say that Christ will not come. He does not scoff at the idea of his second coming. But in his heart, and by his action and his words, his careless attitude, his cavalier attitude, he declares that the Lord is delayed. Because I'm a Christian, I go to church, but I've got my 35-foot boat, my motor home, my piece of my vacation home I'm working on buying. I'm doing everything I can to gain everything in the world. it doesn't sound like you're preparing for the second coming of the Lord, does it? If you're engaged in all the world has to offer. He banishes, now in doing this, he banishes from the minds of others the conviction that the Lord is coming soon. And that leads other people for perilous delay. So if you're not living like the Lord is coming soon, you have an effect on other people. He is accusing and condemning those who are faithful to their masters. You might look upon resentment to some people who are preparing to meet the Lord and their godly way they live. You might be a little resentful of it because it shows your guilt. He mingles with the world, attacking faithful Christians we see today. And it says here, like grows with like in transgression, and it is a fearful assimilation. We get to the end, this assimilation will coalesce and will be against God's people. Along with the world he is taken in the snare. The Lord of that servant shall come at an hour when he is not aware, and shall cut him asunder and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. If therefore you shall not watch, I will come to you as a thief, and you shall not know what hour I come upon you. Revelation 3:3. Now, today, the advent of Christ will surprise the false teachers and preachers. Those that are saying peace and safety. In 1 Thessalonians 5:3, sudden destruction comes upon them. And they've been preaching peace and safety. And you hear this in churches, you hear prosperity churches. Nobody's saying that you need to remove sin from your life and get ready because the Lord's coming. But you have a preparation of work to do. We have a work to do, not only on ourselves, but for others. Like the priests and the teachers before the fall of Jerusalem, they look for a church that enjoys earthly prosperity. Remember in Matthew, when I started Matthew 23, how Jesus was so upset with the scribes and the Pharisees? There was no preparation for the coming of the Messiah. They weren't ready for Jesus. They didn't accept him. Churches are doing much similar today. Upon all who make this world their home, the day of God will come as a snare. It comes to them as a prowling thief. The world, full of rioting, full of godless pleasures, is asleep in carnal security. They laugh at warnings. People make fun of Christians today. These simple-minded people. The proud boast is made. All things continue as they were from the beginning. Tomorrow shall be the same as this day and much more abundant. That's from 2 Peter. Christ says, behold, I come as a thief. At the very time when the world is asking in scorn, so to speak, where is the promise of his coming? Signs are fast fulfilling. While the cry, peace and safety, sudden destruction is going to come. When the routine of work is carried on without regard to principle, when the student is eagerly seeking knowledge in everything but the Bible, you remember colleges used to be places of Christian learning, the major colleges now, far from that. Christ will come as a thief. Everything in the world is in agitation. You believe that? The signs of the times are ominous. Coming events are casting a shadow. The Spirit of God is withdrawing from the earth. You know, the Spirit of God is withdrawing from those who have not sought out God. If you've sought out God and you love God, the Spirit is being applied more to your life. It's a good thing. But the others is being withdrawn. God's Spirit is withdrawing from the earth. Calamity follows calamity, by sea and by land, tornadoes, earthquakes, fires, floods, murders of every grade. Who can read the future, and where is security? There is assurance in nothing that is human or earthly. Rapidly are men being arranged on the side they have chosen. Restlessly they are waiting and watching movements of leaders. Few believe with their heart and soul that we have an eternal death to shun. The crisis is gradually stealing upon us. Men are jostling one against another, contending for the highest place. The highest excitement prevails, yet probation hour is fast closing. Every case is about to be eternally decided. And Satan sees the time is short, and he has set all his agencies at work that men may be deceived. They may be deluded, occupied, and entranced, kept busy with the things of the world. All right, let me close with this. Solomon comes down through the ages of the centuries, Jesus' warnings from the Mount of Olives. Take heed of yourselves, lest at any time your heart be overcharged with carousing and drunkenness, and this could apply to us, the cares of this life. And that day comes upon you unexpectedly. And he says here in verse 35, Luke 21:35, watch, therefore, and pray always, not just 40 years, pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape these things which will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. So that's our lesson today from the Mount of Olives, two-part message for the disciples and for us. So I hope you got something out of this and can apply some of it to your life. So thank you. Amen.